All right, guys, and that ridiculous non-stop Strand explosion was the current Strand setup I'm rolling. So yeah, today we're going to be showing you the Strand setup that I have going. Yeah, I did finally beat the campaign. I took my time. Sorry, guys. I have a weird day job, so I'm a little slow on a lot of the things that a lot of people have plenty of time to get to. I work like 70, 75 hours every week, including every day of the week. So my time is limited, and it's a real treat when I get to sit down and actually get some gaming in. But I did finally beat the solo campaign on legendary difficulty. Very, very challenging indeed, but very, very fun and very rewarding to be certain. So that is what we're running now. I've maxed out my Strand. We've got plenty to do, plenty to discover, and you'll see what happens when I get a cluster of enemies anywhere near. They're just going to start constantly exploding on each other and suspending in the air if it doesn't one-shot them. So that's kind of the core of this build that I've got. There's a lot of different paths. I played around with a few different ways of doing this build and multiple different weapon setups, but this is the one that I kind of landed on that I like the best. So I'm absorbing my grenade right there. I'm going to start blasting enemies to try to kill them so I can get this more powered hit when they explode into a million pieces and chain into other enemies. So that's kind of a common theme with a lot of the Warlock builds. It's ad clear, it's AoE pressure, it's kind of chaining one thing to the next, and that is true. There's different builds, completely different types of builds you can do on Strand that I've discovered so far, but this is the one that I think has worked the best, especially paired with this Osteostriga. Now, I am using a Strand exotic pair of boots, but I've also played around with pairing Osteo with the Necrotic Grip gauntlets. They both do well. In fact, I would say in general, I think the Necrotic Grips actually pairs a little bit better. But if there's a bunch of people running Strand in the group with which you're playing, it actually works out okay because a lot of people make the Tangle Balls, and then the abilities I have fed into this, if you actually shoot them, make them really, really powerful. So that's kind of the setup here. A lot of different ways to go about it. So we'll just do one of these guys. We'll just crash, bang, boom. Send out my little seeker guys. Yep, they're doing their job. Very close to another absorption grenade. Up. Yep, there's a tangle, so let's pop it. Honestly, it does so much damage you rarely even get to see them, at least on the moon. In the campaigns with a higher difficulty on enemies, it actually does work a little better. But you'll see how that explodes this mass web of tangles, and everybody just either pops immediately, one shot popped, or they start getting suspended in the air. That is the core of this build. It works really, really well, guys. I'm going to absorb another nade so you can see what I'm doing here. Killing an enemy, targeting another, and this is just osteo damage. There's a group of enemies, and that all but wipes this one clear. Pop the tangle, pop they go. So that's the build, guys. So I'm going to travel back to orbit now that you've kind of seen it in action, and I'm going to show you the exact setup. So you already know Osteostriga is the weapon I'm using. And there's plenty of weapons you could use. Indeed, when I first was running this, I was using the Quicksilver Storm that I quickly got the masterwork done over at the Grasp of Avarice dungeon checkpoint at the very beginning where there's a non-stop flood of enemies, and I was the only one in there. So that's a quick way to upgrade weapons. Aside from the moon, there's a few places. But as soon as you get this masterworked and you plug in the catalyst, it does change its damage type to Strand. I also have a couple different Strand subclass type weapons, but this build doesn't actually require Strand subclass weapons, and it still functions beautifully. So I'm using Osteostriga. You probably know that one well. It's the poison spreading SMG. And then over here, I have it paired with the new exotic Swarmers. This is a Strand-based exotic for the Warlock. Destroying a tangle spawns a threadling. Your threadlings unravel targets they damage. So this feeds entirely into the setup for Strand. So let's pop right in to the Strand, and we'll go over what I have on my setup. Healing Rift as always, Burst Glide as always. Arcane Needle is our melee. You can throw up to 3 at a time, and this is where we can start getting a sense of the new terminology on the Strand. So Unravel. A target is permeated with destructive strand matter. As they take additional damage, they create unraveled projectiles that seek out nearby enemies. That is a key to why this spreads and booms and just kind of is so good at ad clearing. Unraveling rounds from your Strand weapons pierce barrier champions and stun them. So that's where swapping off of Osteo onto the Quicksilver Storm might be a good idea in higher end content. Just in run of the mill, trolling on the moon, it doesn't really matter. And then it further goes on to tell you that unraveled targets will unwind into a tangle when they are defeated. Now, I am using the Shackle Grenade. Suspend is the key. If you just throw it, it will immobilize the targets in strand matter. It literally suspends them in air. And for quite a substantial period of time, I would guess it's at least 4, 5, 6 seconds. It does last quite a while. And they're basically free picking. They can't fight you. They can't do anything. They're suspended in the air, and you can just mow your targets down. While they're suspended, guardians or combatants enemies are unable to move or fire their weapons, and this also does stun unstoppable champions, and suspended targets do unwind into a tangle when they are defeated, and it's really easy to defeat them. But what this doesn't tell you is tied into the aspects and the fragments when we get to that in just a second. So the first aspect here, Weaver's Call. When you cast your Rift, that's my Healing Rift, it will weave 3 threadlings and deploy threadlings that I have perched. So that's those little kind of worm-looking things, little green worm-looking things that seek out enemies to damage them. It spawns those by default. Also, when I pull my ult, it will spawn threadlings into existence. So you kind of have these target-seeking little strand worms that go out to do damage on your behalf that you don't have to worry about calling. Then the second aspect I have is the Mind Spun Invocation, and this is one of the keys to the build. So it tells you that it does a lot of different things depending on the grenade you have selected. I have the Shackle Grenade, so this kind of middle of the spiel there is what applies. Left bumper press. If you hold left bumper to charge the grenade, it says hold to consume your Shackle Grenade and activate Weaver's Trance. Final blows while Weaver's Trance is active create a suspending detonation. That is the fundamental key to this build. So the reason that Osteostriga works so well is because of its spreading damage to nearby targets and how effectively it does put out damage. So if I charge my Shackle Grenade and then I take an enemy down with Osteostriga and it starts spreading it, it is going to start naturally making a ton of suspension that's suspended in the air just like the base grapple-nade upon detonation, and it's just going to chain. So they're either all going to get one shot if their health pool is too low, or it's just going to chain big suspensions in the air. So instead of having 1 or 2 targeted by the grenade, you charge it, then kill them with your weapon. You just start spawning a bunch of insta-gibs, or everybody gets suspended in the air, leaving them open to quickly take down and to prevent them from attacking you. So it is massively, massively powerful. That is the absolute key to this build. I would argue in tandem with a good weapon that allows you to take down enemies quickly. Osteo really does the job on this build. I do recommend it. Now for fragments. I've got Thread of Propagation, Powered Melee Final Blows, grant your Strand weapons Unraveling rounds. I have that on because sometimes I swap back to the Quicksilver Storm. Obviously, I'm not using a Strand weapon right now, so I don't have the Unraveling rounds, but we can read about it. Unraveling rounds pierce barrier champion shields and stun them. Unravel targets, unwind into tangles, and we already looked at Unravel, so we know what that does. It's going to seek out targets, so very, very powerful to be sure. The second one that I have is Thread of Rebirth. Strand weapon final blows have a chance to create a Threadling. A chance. So Threadlings are those little green worms, and it tells you specifically they're creatures woven from strand matter that seek nearby targets and attack, dealing damage. The third one is Thread of Fury. Damaging targets with a tangle grants meleeed energy. The tangles are those little green balls that you'll see. You can create them, and your fellow guardians can create them. If you don't pick them up and throw them, if you actually shoot them, or pick them up and throw them, shooting them will explode in kind of an AoE, or you can pick them up and target enemies. Either way, it's going to give you back melee energy with this aspect. Then the final one I have is Thread of Mind. Defeating suspended targets grants class ability energy. Since we are constantly suspending enemies with our charged shackle grenade, this is going to be constantly feeding our energy back. So this is kind of the loop. Suspend, chain it, and then get the energy back to wash, rinse, repeat. That's the crux of this build. I have a few different fragments that I've unlocked as well. Some of these work a little bit better if you're going to use a non-strand weapon. Like you see, I have two, but like I said, I swap back and forth between Osteo and the Quicksilver. When I'm playing higher level content, I like the Quicksilver because these other aspects make it a bit stronger. But when I'm just running around and base easy content, it really doesn't matter. These other aspects don't really come into play. I don't really need them. It's just the loop back feedback loop rather, of the suspension and the charging. So that is the core of the build, guys. There's a lot of different ways to go about this. This is kind of what I settled on for just running around, gaining XP, banging out bounties, whatever the case may be. In higher spec content, I'm swapping over to my Quicksilver Storm so that I do have that Strand weapon to allow me to throw in my Strand aspect or fragment abilities that I have that feed further into the build that make it all the more powerful. So that is the build, guys. That's the setup. There's several different ways you can go. I played around with a few different Strand builds. I started with kind of the grapple grenade, and that was pretty fun. You're definitely mobile, but this one just really, really puts out the damage, and this is kind of where I landed on it for the build. Yeah, so that's it, guys. That's the setup. Hopefully, if you get a chance to build this, if you don't have all the different pieces to set it up, this one's pretty flexible, so you could kind of customize a few different items of it. But the key is the functionality of feeding that suspension grenade and just chaining the damage to feed the energy right back in to watch, rinse, repeat. That's kind of the main functionality of the build, and that is what makes it really, really fun. And even if you don't use a Strand ability weapon, this build does function quite well. You may want to tweak a couple of your fragments, but that's okay. Whatever works best for you, but this is one that I really, really liked. I'm glad I finally beat the campaign. It was extremely challenging as a solo player, but highly rewarding, and we got it done. Guys, I hope you find this build useful. As always, let me know what you think down in the comments. If you have suggestions, ideas, if you've figured out some other things that I haven't, definitely throw it down in the comments. I'll test it, and I'll let you know what I think. As always, guys, I appreciate you checking in. We will catch you on the next one.